So one of the common misconceptions I hear about Kotlin is that it's Google's new language that they created specifically for Android. But if we look at the larger evolution of the Kotlin ecosystem, we see very clearly that Kotlin extends far beyond just Android applications. Welcome to the Goobar podcast, where we talk about building great software and helping others do the same. Here we have short chats about things like software development and building your ideal career in tech. We aim to foster a sense of community, connection, and inspiration so we can all continue to dream, learn, and create. Hey devs! This week, we're taking a look at my favorite programming language, Kotlin. What's the state of Kotlin in 2021? What's the ecosystem look like? And how is Kotlin being used? Keep listening to find out. Kotlin just celebrated the 10th anniversary of its first commits, which started back in 2010. So here in 2021, Kotlin will be going on 11 years old, which is honestly pretty hard for me to believe still. I can still remember when I first heard about it, first started playing with it, it felt very new and exciting. It's really cool to see how far Kotlin has come. As of today, the latest release of Kotlin is 1.4.21. I'll have a link to the releases of Kotlin in the show notes if you want to check those out. But if you look back through those releases from the past year or two, you see that we're getting about one major release a year. Last year, that was Kotlin 1.4.0. And we're getting several incremental and bug fix releases throughout the year. So what does this mean for us? What can we kind of extrapolate from this for 2021? Well, it means we're likely to see Kotlin 1.5 come stable. And we're probably going to see some follow-up releases like 1.5.1 and maybe 1.5.2. So we'll see usually the big new features coming in the major release, within smaller features, bug fixes and such coming in those small ones. So we can feel fairly confident that the language is going to continue to evolve, but we're unlikely to see too much in the way of big, exciting new things, or also in the way of things such as breaking feature changes, which is a good thing. It helps us be predictable in how we go about integrating these changes and adopting them into our projects. So again, if we look back at the past year, maybe a little bit longer, we've seen Kotlin coroutines become stable. Additionally, we've seen flow and then state flow and shared flow. So I've seen a lot of work kind of in the core language for improving asynchronous programming and making it easy to use and efficient. We've seen Kotlin Multiplatform Mobile released in alpha form. We've seen a lot of work on a new IR backend for all Kotlin executable targets, for JVM, for Kotlin Native, for Kotlin JS. We've also seen Jetpack Compose start to mature for Android, while Compose for desktop and even Compose for web are really ramping up. So all of this stuff is really happening in the open. Kotlin continues to evolve with a lot of visibility, with a lot of public input. And you can find language proposals and discussion about those proposals on GitHub. It's pretty easy to find. I'll keep a link to it in the show notes, but it's at github.com/Kotlin/keep. And you can see how people are talking about this. You can see where the language might be going. It's really interesting. It's a great way to learn about how the language design process goes on. It's a great way to get a better understanding of the kind of the mindset or the goals and thinking beyond Kotlin and where the language is going. Definitely worth poking around in there and just exploring that if you've never done so. Like I mentioned, GitHub is the place where we can go to learn more about Kotlin, see the code, and the Kotlin repo on GitHub right now sits at around 450 contributors with nearly 72,000 commits, which is a huge project. Lots of contributors. Really cool to see all that work being done. And it's so amazing, I think, that we can go and actually see such a popular language being developed kind of out in the open. You can go and start looking through source code. It's really neat that we are kind of in that day and age of open source and everything being so accessible to us with something like GitHub. Now, during the past 10 to 11 years of growth and evolution, Kotlin has gone from kind of the scrappy new language on the block to the second most popular JVM language behind Java, or at least according to the JVM Ecosystem Report that came out in early 2020. Again, I'll have a link to that in the show notes. According to that report, Kotlin accounted for around 5.5% of JVM language usage, trailing by a large margin to Java's dominance at 87%. So clearly, Java is not going anywhere. Kotlin's not taking over for Java anytime soon, but we are seeing Kotlin sort of outpace other JVM languages such as Scala. Now, while it's maybe not dominating the JVM ecosystem yet, since Google first announced support for Kotlin back in 2017, Kotlin's popularity among mobile developers has definitely grown rapidly. In 2019, Kotlin became Google's recommended language for Android, which fueled that even more. And today, Google's numbers claim that over 60% of professional Android developers are using Kotlin, and that 70% of the top 1,000 apps on Google Play are using Kotlin. Now, we should probably take these numbers with a grain of salt, but it does suggest that Kotlin is being used widely in the Android development ecosystem and that it's gaining traction, because just a few years ago, those numbers would have been much, much smaller. So I think this suggests that Kotlin definitely has found a strong community within Android and will likely continue to grow, especially with Google's mindset of Kotlin first these days. The fact that Kotlin is the default, the recommended language for Android, we're just going to see Kotlin's popularity continue to grow in that space. This podcast is supported by awesome listeners like you. If you enjoyed the podcast and find this episode useful, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It helps out the show and lets me know how to best serve you all with future episodes. If you have a question or would like to suggest a future topic idea, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to podcast@goobar.io for your question or topic to possibly be featured in a future episode. And now, let's get back to more Kotlin. So as Kotlin has grown older, it has continued to evolve. 2020 saw a big change to that evolution story when Roman Elizaberov took over for Andrei Breslov as the new project lead. Roman was the driving force behind Kotlin coroutines, so he's a very great choice for taking over the project here. I have no doubt that the future of Kotlin is in great hands, and we've seen that since that transition. We've seen that in the months since then with the roadmaps ahead, just the way that nothing has really gone off the rails. We just feel very confident that Kotlin is going to continue to evolve in a very positive direction. Now, as we start looking in that direction, I think there's 3 areas that sort of I have seen, and also 3 areas that kind of come through when you start looking at the Kotlin public roadmap. And so those 3 areas, as I'll describe them, are continued growth into server-side JVM applications, continued development of Jetpack Compose, Compose for desktop, Compose for web, and then just the general Kotlin multi-platform story as well. So one of the common misconceptions I hear about Kotlin is that it's Google's new language that they created specifically for Android. But if we look at the larger evolution of the Kotlin ecosystem, we see very clearly that Kotlin extends far beyond just Android applications. Today, there are a number of Kotlin-based frameworks for building server-side applications as well. We have Ktor, which is from JetBrains, and they've been working on, which is built from the ground up using Kotlin as a solution for asynchronous client-server work. So with Ktor, you can build fully functional web-based applications, whether that's a backend, whether that's your front end. You can use it for client server work and multi-platform projects. It's really a cool, easy to use library. And if you are familiar with Kotlin and maybe not so familiar with writing kind of client server code, I'd encourage you to check it out because it's, like I said, it's easy to get up and running with, and you can actually start learning a lot just about building a simple server application while using a language that you're comfortable, which is really helpful. Now, beyond Ktor, Spring Boot has really strong support for Kotlin, and the Spring and Spring community, the Spring and Spring Boot community have wide adoption. So the fact that Kotlin is works great in those ecosystems, works great with that tooling, I think we'll continue to see more and more Kotlin in that space. And then there's some other kind of more niche frameworks here as well that are taking advantage of Kotlin. And one of those that I hear people mention from time to time is Quarkus, which is a JVM based framework for building microservices. And they continue to invest support in Kotlin as well. And another one that I don't know as much about, but I believe is HTTP 4K, I think. This one I didn't have in my notes, but I'm just mentioning off the top of my head. But yeah, so we see that there's development of multiple frameworks out there for writing server-side code in Kotlin. I also see anecdotally more developers and dev teams that seem to be using Kotlin for backend code. So I think that's a trend that we will continue to see in 2021 and beyond. Now, if you're an Android dev, one trend that you're probably already been following and are really excited to see evolve is that of Jetpack Compose. If you're not familiar, Jetpack Compose is the new in-development UI toolkit for Android. This work is super exciting on its own and looks to transform modern Android development. But even more intriguing beyond that is the work being done to make Compose a cross-platform solution for UI development in general. Compose for desktop is already available for preview, and Compose for web is at least being played with to some extent, with hints that more work and more official support will be coming down the line. Now, from a more technical look at this, a lot of the work supporting Compose is all being done under the hood and kind of based on the updated IR backend for Kotlin JVM, Kotlin JS, and Kotlin native targets. Now, the IR, or intermediate representation, provides a more unified compiler backend for building all Kotlin executables. So it means that as the compilation process is happening, there is more of a shared pipeline going from Kotlin to each of sort of the native executable targets, whether you're compiling for JVM or Kotlin JS or for a native platform like iOS. So for us as developers, this hopefully means that we're going to get features faster, we're going to get better optimized compilation processes, more bug fixes, all with more efficient execution from the JetBrains team. It also likely means then that, as this IR backend and compiler plugin mature, we'll likely start to see even faster evolution of things like Compose because of the fact that they're built pretty heavily on compiler plugins and some of this backend work. So as all that stuff starts to mature, I think this year, I think we're going to start to see some pretty exciting stuff coming out of Compose across the different platforms. And I think the reason that, at least for me, that the different Compose variants are really interesting is because of the work that JetBrains has been doing and investing into Kotlin Multiplatform. Last year in 2020, we saw the first official alpha release of Kotlin Multiplatform Mobile, which you can find a link for in the show notes to learn more about that. But basically, Kotlin Multiplatform Mobile is kind of a smaller, tailored set of tooling, APIs, and libraries specific to the Kotlin Multiplatform use cases of building mobile apps. So it kind of leverages the Kotlin Multiplatform technology and then adds in plugins and tooling and whatnot to kind of package it into a little bit more of a polished experience specific for mobile apps. And if you haven't tried it yet, I highly encourage you to give it a shot. The technology has really come a long way in the past year, and it's become pretty straightforward to start sharing business logic between iOS and Android. We recently started playing with this on my team at work, and within a day or two, we were able to really validate that this would be a viable solution for us, and are now currently actively working on shipping some Kotlin Multiplatform code into production. We feel very strongly in it for our use case of sharing some simple sort of analytics code between both Android and iOS. Now, if you want to start doing more code sharing, especially beyond just very simple things like strings or some simple classes, the developer ecosystem around Kotlin Multiplatform has really evolved to support this more complex development. There are now quite a few open source libraries available for common functionality such as logging, networking, GraphQL, Firebase, analytics, and much more. This really starts to empower devs to focus on building products rather than on infrastructure and tooling, which should only help drive adoption of Kotlin Multiplatform even further. And if you want to check out the list of Kotlin Multiplatform libraries, I'll have the link to that in the show notes. In 2021, we'll likely see further refinement of the multi-platform mobile story, while also seeing improvements to the Kotlin native side of things and some of the other targets as well, Kotlin JS, for example. I also hope that we start to see more success stories from teams using this technology and more tutorials for devs looking to learn more about Kotlin Multiplatform. I think there's still a lot of trail to be blazed in this regard on the developer education side, and I think it'll really help as the tooling stabilizes. It'll become easier to kind of create tutorials, and it'll become easier for others to learn, which then hopefully just drives adoption even further. Now, the last thing I just want to touch on for the state of Kotlin 2021 is where you can go to learn more about all things Kotlin. Now, there's a lot of resources out there, and it can be difficult to sift through all of them and find what you're looking for. If you're just starting out with the language, then you probably want to learn some fundamentals, which thankfully doesn't change as often with new releases, which means that older learning resources are usually okay. And I have a couple that I think are still quite helpful. So I have several playlists on my YouTube channel that help learn the basics of Kotlin syntax, how to create a simple project where you can start playing with Kotlin. I'll have the link to all of these learning resources in the show notes. I also have a 2.5-hour course on freeCodeCamp that compiles a lot of these smaller tutorials into one larger single tutorial. And if you like books, you can check out my book, Mastering Kotlin, on Amazon, which does a pretty good job, I think, of digging into the fundamentals of the language and then going a little bit deeper to help you understand why you want to follow certain paradigms or certain Kotlin idioms, and kind of helping you understand a little bit more what's going on under the hood, and then introducing you to maybe a couple of different types of development you can do with Kotlin at the end of the book. So those 3 resources I think are quite good to help you understand the fundamentals of Kotlin. Now, if you're looking to use Kotlin to build Android apps, the good news is that most tutorials these days are using Kotlin. So Google has several courses for building Android apps with Kotlin, and I'll link to those courses down below. I have a 9-week series on Android fundamentals with Kotlin that I taught at a local university last year. So I have all 9 of those lectures in a playlist on YouTube, and you can check those out. I think it's roughly 15 hours worth of content. So it does a pretty deep dive into building a simple Android app using Kotlin, using some of the Android Jetpack libraries. And then on YouTube as well, there's 2 awesome YouTube channels that most of you are probably very familiar with at this point, because they have, I think both probably by the time you're listening to this will have over 100,000 subscribers. But Coding with Mitch and Coding in Flow both have a lot of great tutorials, and many of which are using Kotlin these days. I think in particular, Mitch's channel has an awesome series going on lately, specifically for Jetpack Compose. So that'd be a great resource to check out. And then finally, just a couple miscellaneous things here. If you want to stay up to date on just the Kotlin ecosystem or some of the more cutting edge stuff, definitely check out the Talking Kotlin podcast. It's a great resource. Talk to a lot of different developers in the community who are doing interesting things with Kotlin. Great way to stay up to date. Another interesting resource out there is Compose Academy, which is a website developed by Joe Birch, who is a great developer, a great guy, Google developer expert, and he's put together this website for people to start learning Jetpack Compose. And you can find that at compose.academy. Nice little bite-sized tutorials on very specific pieces of functionality and specific APIs that you can leverage to start building apps with Jetpack Compose. And then lastly, there is now an official Kotlin YouTube channel as well. There's not a lot of content there yet, but I imagine and I am hoping that it'll become a pretty good resource for new info moving forward. So you can find a link to that Kotlin YouTube channel again in the show notes down below. We're going to wrap it up there because that was a lot. And at this point, talking too much more would start to be just conjecture. And I don't want to drag on for too much longer. So, we looked at a lot of things. We looked at where Kotlin is today, how it's been evolving, and some of the areas where I think we'll see continued investment in 2021. I know I dropped a lot of links. So again, all of those links will be in the notes so you can find the learning resources, some of the numbers, some of the frameworks and things if you want to learn more about any of that stuff. If you enjoyed the episode, please, I would encourage you to leave a review or leave a shout out on social media or something, and be sure to subscribe for future chats about software development and career. And remember, if you have questions or topic ideas, I'd love to hear from you, and you can send those into podcast@goobar.io for your question and idea to possibly be featured in a future episode. As always, thank you so much for listening. Remember to dream, learn, and create, and I'll catch you all in the next episode. Until next time, devs.